When Mary opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all like it, and thought it curious and gloomy. One wall was covered with a tapestry with a forest scene woven into it. On the other side of the room was a deep window, and through it she could see a giant climbing stretch of land which seemed to have no trees on it, and it looked rather like an endless, dull, purplish sea.
What is that?
Out the window there?
Yes.
That's the moor. Does it like it?
No, I hate it.
That's because thou art not used to it. Thou thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it.
Do you?
Aye, that I do. I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with growing things that smell sweet. It's fair lovely in spring and summer, when the gorse and broom and heather's in flower. It smells of honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and skylarks make such a nice noise humming and singing. I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything.
You are a strange servant.
I know that. If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have been even one of the under-housemaids. I'm too common and talk too much Yorkshire. But this is a funny house, for all it's so grand. Miss Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she could never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses.
Are you going to be my servant?
I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant, and she's Mr. Craven's. But I'm to do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit. But you won't need much waiting on.
Who is going to dress me?
Cannot the dress thy son?
What do you mean? I don't understand your language.
I forgot. Miss Medlock told me I'd have to be careful, or you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes?
No, I never did in my life. My eye addressed me, of course.
Well, it's time thou should learn. Thou cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on thy son a bit.
It is different in India.
I can see it's different. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out bare fools. What with nurses and being washed and dressed and took out to walk as if they were puppies.
You daughter of a pig!
Who are you calling names? You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk.
You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything!
Suddenly, she felt so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face down on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing.
You mustn't cry like that there. You mustn't for sure. I didn't know you'd be so vexed. I don't know anything about anything. Just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying. There now. It's time for thee to get up. Miss Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and tea and dinner into the next room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on with thy clothes if thou get out of bed. If the buttons are at the back, thou cannot button them up thyself.
Those are not mine. Mine are black. Those are nicer than mine.
These are the ones thou must put on. Mr. Craven ordered Miss Medlock to get 'em in London. He said, I won't have a child dressed in black wandering about like a lost soul, he said. Put colour on her. Mother, she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold with black for mourning herself.
I hate black things.
The dressing process was one which taught them both something. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings and picking up things she let fall. Martha had buttoned up her little sisters and brothers, but she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own.
You should have seen 'em all. There's 12 of us, and my father only gets 16 shillin' a week. I can tell you my mother's put to it to get porridge for 'em all. They tumble about on the moor and play there all day, and Mother says the air of the moor fattens 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass same as the wild ponies do. Our Dickon, he's 12 years old, and he's got a young pony he calls his own.
Where did he get it?
He found it on the moor with its mother when it was a little one, and he began to make friends with it, and give it bits of bread and pluck young grass for it. And it got to like him, and so it follows him around, and it lets him get on his back. Dickon's a kind lad, and animals likes him.
I've never had a pet before. I think I might like it.
So she began to feel a slight interest in Dickon, and as she had never before been interested in anyone but herself, it was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room which had been made into a nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with gloomy pictures on the walls and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the center of the room was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her.
I don't want it.
That doesn't want thy porridge?
No.
That doesn't know how good it is. Put a bit of treacle in it, or a bit of sugar.
I don't want it.
I can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes.
Why?
Why? Because they scarce ever had their stomachs full in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes.
I don't know what it is to be hungry.
Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see that plain enough. I've no patience with folks as sits and just stares at good bread and meat. My word! Don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what's here under their pinafores?
Why don't you take it to them?
It's not mine, and this isn't my day out. I get my day off once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for Mother and give her a day's rest.
I could drink some tea and have a bit of toast with marmalade, I suppose.
Well, that's something, I suppose. And when you're done, wrap up warm and run out and play, you. It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat.
Out? Why should I go out on a day like this? It's grey and cold.
Well, if they doesn't go out, they'll have to stay in. And what has that got to do?
Who will go with me?
They'll go by thyself. You'll have to learn to play like other children does when they haven't got sisters or brothers. Our Dickon goes off on the moor by himself and plays for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony.
It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out, though she was not aware of it. Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her the way downstairs.
If they goes round that way, they'll come to the gardens. There's lots of flowers in summertime, but there's nothing blooming now. One of the gardens is locked up. Noah's been in it for 10 years.
Why?
Mr. Craven had it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There's Mrs. Medlock's bell ringing. I must run.
After Martha had gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to a door in a wall of shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the gardens which no one had been into for 10 years.
I wonder what it looks like now. Could there be flowers still alive in it? A garden shut up for 10 years.
When she passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in great gardens with wide lawns and winding walks with clipped borders. There were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes, and a large pool with an old gray fountain in its midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up.
How can a garden be shut up? You can always walk into a garden.
She was thinking this when she saw that, at the end of the path she was following, there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. She went toward the wall and found that there was a green door in the ivy, and that it stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found that it was a garden with walls all around it, and that it was only one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into one another.
The place is bare and ugly enough. It might be nicer in summer when things are green, but there is nothing pretty about it now.
Presently, an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door leading from the secret garden.
What?
He looked startled when he saw Mary, and then touched his cap. He had a surly old face, and did not seem at all pleased to see her. But then she was displeased with his garden, and wore her quite contrary expression, and certainly did not seem at all pleased to see him.
What is this place?
One of the kitchen gardens, where we grow the fruits and the vegetables.
And what's that door?
Another of them. There's another on the other side of the wall. And there's the orchard of fruit trees on the other side of that.
Can I go in then?
If the lights. But there's not to see.
Mary made no response. She went down the path and through the second green door. There she found more walls, as well as winter vegetable beds covered with glass frames to keep the frost off of them. But in the second wall there was another green door, and it was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden which no one had seen for 10 years. As she was not at all a timid child and always did what she wanted to, Mary went to the green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open, because she wanted to be sure she had found the mysterious garden. But it did open, quite easily, and she walked through it and found herself in an orchard. Walls all round it also, and trees trained flat against them, and there were bare fruit trees growing in the winter-browned grass. But there was no green door to be seen anywhere. For it. And yet, when she had entered the upper end of the garden, she had noticed that the wall did not seem to end with the orchard, but to extend beyond it, as if it enclosed a place at the other side. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them. He burst into his winter song, almost as if he had caught sight of her and was calling to her.
I wonder if he knows where to find the shut-up garden. Why did Mr. Craven bury the key? If he liked his wife so much, why does he hate her garden? I wonder if I shall ever see him. But if I did, I should not like him, and he would not like me. I should only stand and stare at him and say nothing, even though I want to ask him why had he done such queer things. If there is no door here, I might as well go back. People never like me, and I never like people. I could never talk as the Crawford children could. They were always talking and laughing and making noises. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. I feel sure it was. There was a wall round the place and there was no door. I have been into other gardens.
There was nothing to prevent thee.
I went into the orchard.
There was no dog at the door to bite thee.
There was no door there into the other garden.
What other garden?
The one on the other side of the wall. There are trees there. I saw the tops of them. A bird with a red breast was sitting on one of them, and he sang.
To her surprise, the surly old weather-beaten face actually changed its expression. A slow smile spread over it, and the gardener looked quite different. It made her think that it was curious how much nicer a person looked when he smiled. She had not thought of it before.
Here he is, that cheeky little beggar. I have not seen thee before today. Has thou been courting this early in the season?
The bird put its tiny head on one side and looked up at him with his soft bright eye, which was like a black dewdrop. He seemed quite familiar, and not the least afraid. He hopped about and pecked the earth briskly, looking for seeds and insects. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart, because he was so pretty and cheerful and seemed so like a person. He had a tiny plump body and a delicate beak and slender, delicate legs.
Will he always come when you call him?
Aye, that he will. I known him ever since he was a fledgling. He come out of the nest in the other garden, and when he first flew over the wall, he was too weak to fly back for a few days, and we got friendly. When he went over the wall, the rest of the brood was gone, and he was lonely, and he come back to me.
What kind of bird is he?
Doesn't thou know? He's a robin redbreast. They're the friendliest, curious birds alive. They're almost as friendly as dogs, if you know how to get on with them. Watch him peck about there and looking around at us now and again. He knows we're talking about him. He's a conceited one. He likes to hear folks talk about him. And curious. Bless me. There's never was his like for curiosity and meddling. He's always coming to see what I'm planting. He knows all the things Mr. Craven never troubles himself to hear about. He's the head gardener, he is.
Where did the rest of the brood fly to?
There's no knowing. The old ones turn 'em out of their nest and make 'em fly, and they're scattered before you know it. This one's a knowing one, and he knows he's lonely.
I'm lonely.
She had not known before that this was one of the things which made her feel sour and cross. She seemed to find it out when the robin looked at her and she looked at the robin.
What is your name?
Ben Weatherstaff. I'm lonely myself, except when he's with me. He's the only friend I've got.
I have no friends at all. I never had any. My ayah didn't like me and I never played with anyone.
That and me are a good bit alike. We was woven out of the same cloth. We're neither of us good looking, and we're both of us as sour as we look. We've got the same nasty tempers, both of us, I'll warrant.
This was plain speaking, and Mary Lennox had never heard the truth about herself in her life. Her servants had always salaamed and submitted to her, whatever she did. She had never thought much about her looks, and she wondered if she looked as sour as Ben Weatherstaff had looked before the robin came. She actually began to wonder, also, if she was nasty-tempered. She felt uncomfortable.
What did he do that for?
He's made up his mind to make friends with thee. Dang me if he hasn't took a fancy to thee.
To me? Would you make friends with me? Would you?
Why, thou said that as nice and human as if that was a real child instead of a sharp old woman. Thou said it almost like Dickon talks to wild things on the moor.
Do you know Dickon?
Everybody knows him. Dickon's wandering about everywhere. The very blackberries and the heather bells knows him. I warrant the foxes shows him where their cubs lies, and the skylarks don't even hide their nest from him.
He has flown over the wall. He has flown into the orchard. He has flown across the other wall, in the garden where there is no door.
He lives there. He came out the egg there. If he's courting, he's making up to some young madam of a robin that lives among the old rose trees there.
Rose trees? Are there rose trees?
There were 10 years ago.
I should like to see them. Where is the green door? There must be a door somewhere.
There were 10 years ago, but there isn't now.
No door? There must be.
None as anyone can find, and none as anyone's business. Don't you be a meddlesome wench and poke your nose where it's no cause to go. Here, I must go on with my work, get you gone and play you. I have no more time.
And he actually stopped digging, threw his spade over his shoulder, and walked off, without even glancing at her or saying goodbye. At first, each day which passed by for Mary Lennox was exactly like the others. Every morning she awoke in her tapestried room and found Martha kneeling upon the hearth, building her fire. Every morning she ate her breakfast in the room which had nothing amusing in it, and after each breakfast she gazed out of the window across the huge moor. And after a while she realized that if she did not go out, she would have to stay in and do nothing, and so she went out. She did not know that this was the best thing she could have done, and she did not know that, when she began to walk quickly or even run along the paths and down the avenue, she was stirring her slow blood and making herself stronger by fighting the wind which swept down from the moor. She ran only to make herself warm, and she hated the wind which rushed at her face and roared and held her back as if it were some giant she could not see. But the big breaths of fresh air blown over the heather filled her lungs with something which was good for her whole thin body, and whipped some red color into her cheeks and brightened her dull eyes. One place she went to oftener than to any other. It was the long walk outside the gardens with the walls around them. There were bare flower beds on either side of it, and against the walls ivy grew thickly. There was one part of the wall where the creeping dark green leaves were more bushy than elsewhere. It seemed as if, for a long time, that part had been neglected. The rest of it had been clipped and made to look neat, but at this lower end of the walk it had not been trimmed at all. A few days after she had met Ben Weatherstaff, Mary stopped to notice this and wondered why it was so.
Oh, is it you? Is it you? Where are you going? Found yourself a perch in a tree, have you? It's the same tree as before. It's in the garden no one can go into. He lives in there. How I wish I could see what it is like.
She ran up the walk and through the green door she had entered the first morning. Then she ran down the path through the door at the other end and into the orchard. There was the robin finishing his song.
It is the garden. I am sure it is.
She looked closely at that side of the orchard wall, but she only found what she had found before, that there was no door in it. Then she ran through the kitchen gardens again, and out into the walk outside the long ivy-covered wall, and she walked to the end of it and looked at it. But there was no door. She walked around the other end, looking again, but there was no door.
It's very queer. Ben Weatherstaff said there was no door, and there is no door. But there must have been one 10 years ago, because Mr. Craven buried the key.
This gave her so much to think of that she began to be quite interested and feel that she was not sorry that she had come to Misselthwaite Manor. The fact was that the fresh wind from the moor had begun to blow the cobwebs out of her young brain and to waken her up a little. After a few days spent almost entirely out of doors, she sat down to supper one night, feeling hungry and drowsy and comfortable.
They got on well enough with that, didn't they?
It tastes nice today.
It's the air of the moor that's given thee stomach for the victuals. It's lucky for thee that thou'st got victuals as well as appetite. There's been 12 in our cottage as had the stomach and nothing to put it in. You go on playing you outdoors every day and you'll get some flesh on your bones and some colour in your cheek.
I don't play. I have nothing to play with.
Nothing to play with? Our children plays with sticks and stones. They just runs about and shouts and looks at things.
I don't shout, but I do look at things. Sometimes I look for Ben Weatherstaff, but he's usually too busy. I saw the robin again today. He twittered at me just as if to say, "Good morning, isn't the wind nice? Isn't the sun nice? Isn't everything nice?" I believe he lives in the garden no one's been in for 10 years.
Art thou thinking about that garden yet? I knew there would. That was just the way with me when I first heard about it.
Ben Weatherstaff said there was no door, but there must have been 10 years ago if Mr. Craven buried the key. Why did Mr. Craven hate the garden?
Listen to the wind wuthering round the house. You could bear stand up on the moor if you was out on it tonight.
But why did he hate it so? Stay and tell me, Martha. I have no one to talk to.
Phil was very young and used to a cottage full of brothers and sisters. She found it dull in the great servants' hall downstairs, where the footmen and upper housemaids made fun of her Yorkshire speech and looked upon her as a common little thing, and sat and whispered among themselves. Martha liked to talk, and the strange child who had lived in India was novelty enough to attract her. So she sat down on the hearth-rug in front of the fire with Mary and gave up her store of knowledge.
Mind, Miss Medlock said it's not to be talked about. There's lots of things in this place that's not to be talked about. That's Mr. Craven's orders. His troubles are none of the servants' business, he says. But for the garden, he wouldn't be like he is. There was Mrs. Craven's garden that she had made when they first were married, and she just loved it. They used to tend the flowers themselves. None of the gardeners was ever let to go in. Him and her used to go in and shut the door and stay there hours and hours, reading and talking. And she was just a bit of a girl, and there was an old tree with a branch bent like a seat on it. She made roses grow over it, and she used to sit there. But one day when she was sitting there, the branch broke and she fell on the ground and was hurt so bad that the next day she died. The doctors thought he'd go out of his mind and die too. That's why he hates it. No one ever has gone in since, and he won't let no one talk about it.
Mary did not ask any more questions. She looked at the red fire and listened to the withering. It seemed to be withering louder than ever. At that moment, a very good thing was happening to her. 4 good things had happened to her, in fact, since she came to Misselthwaite Manor. She had felt as if she had understood a robin, and that he had understood her. She had run in the wind until her blood had grown warm. She had been healthily hungry for the first time in her life, and she had found out what it was to be sorry for someone.
Do you hear anyone crying?
No, it's the wind. Sometimes it sounds as if someone was lost on the moor and wailing. It's got all sorts of sounds.
But listen, it's in the house, down one of those long corridors.
And at that very moment, a door must have been opened somewhere downstairs, for a great rushing draught blew along the passage, and the door of the room they sat in was blown open with a crash. And as they both jumped to their feet, the light was blown out, and the crying sound was swept down the corridor, so that it was to be heard more plainly than ever. Martha ran and shut the door and turned the key, but before she did, they both heard the sound of a door in some far passage shutting with a bang, and then everything was quiet, for even the wind ceased wuthering for a few moments.
It was the wind. And if it wasn't, it was just little Betty Butterworth, the scullery maid. She's had the toothache all day.
But something troubled and awkward in her manner made Mistress Mary stare very hard at her. She did not believe she was speaking the truth.